Hey everyone, Father Lane here. Welcome to another class in our course on the Gospel of John. And you can see today we are in Olympia, Washington. This is our first visit to a state capital, and I'm going to keep this motif going in this course as we encounter Jesus' many trips to Jerusalem in the Gospel of John. So here we are in Olympia, Washington, the site of the Washington state capital, as Jesus makes his first trip to Jerusalem in the Gospel of John for his first of three celebrations of Passover. Today we're going to look at all of John chapter 2. We're going to look first at the wedding at Cana in greater detail than we already have, and then we're going to look at what happens when Jesus visits the Jerusalem temple for his first Passover. And then we're going to also look at the author's deft artistry as he directs our attention to exactly where he wants it. Remember, the evangelist has already told us his purpose in writing this gospel, so that we, his readers, may come to believe. We've already looked at this outline of the entire Gospel of John, and I just want to call to your attention once again that Jesus begins his public ministry in Galilee. We've seen how the wedding at Cana forms the sixth day of a six-day sequence, reminiscent of the 6 days of creation. It also forms the third day of a three-day sequence, which evokes the revelation of the law at Mount Sinai. And so the wedding at Cana is going to be very important. But I also want to point out that after Jesus performs the miracle at Cana, he's going to go south all the way to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover for the first time. You can see on your screen these two maps. All of Jesus' initial activity is near the Sea of Galilee. This whole map, you can see the tiniest southernmost bit of the Sea of Galilee at the top of the map on your right. Jesus is going to go all the way south to Jerusalem and then work his way back north through the middle area, that is Samaria, which separates Judea and Galilee. So let's look in greater detail now at the wedding at Cana. We've already seen how the story goes and concludes. We've already seen that John tells us that Jesus performed this miracle. He did this as the beginning of his signs in Cana in Galilee, and so revealed his glory, and his disciples began to believe in him. But there's more than just the revelation of glory, again, reminiscent of Exodus 19, the revelation at Sinai, and there's more to it than just the narration of the beginning of the new creation, like we've talked about before. There are some other key details in how John tells the story of what happened that day at Cana. We cut to the chase. His mother said to the servers, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for Jewish ceremonial washings, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus told them, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Draw some out now and take it to the head waiter." So they took it. And when the head waiter tasted the water that had become wine. Notice how the evangelist narrates the miracle. He doesn't even tell us exactly what it looked like when that water blushed into wine. Rather, the head waiter just kind of finds out. He notices and then has a conversation with the bridegroom. So notice the contrast with the revelation of God's glory, which is magnificent. There's a shofar, there's thunder, there's lightning in Exodus 19. Here, the revelation of a surpassing glory is much humbler, and that's important because the major controversy in the first century between Jews who believed in Jesus and Jews who did not believe in Jesus was, how can Jesus, who was crucified, truly be this glorious Messiah? How can Jesus truly exceed Moses, as John told us back in John 1:17? The law came through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. This is John's answer to that question. He is more glorious, but it's a humbler manifestation of glory. But there's more. Notice this word in the blue, water and water jars. The term water jar occurs 3 times in the entire Greek New Testament, all 3 in the Gospel of John, 2 of them in this passage. Notably also, though, as we'll see in our next class when we meet the Samaritan woman, she brings a water jar to the well to draw water. But after her encounter with Jesus, she casts the water jar aside. So the water jar has a symbolic value. In both cases, here at Cana as well as with the Samaritan woman, it's going to be cast from its original purpose. Because of the living water that the Samaritan woman receives from Jesus, she no longer needs that water jar and that still water from the well. In the wedding at Cana, because of what Jesus is going to do, we won't be needing those Jewish ceremonial washings anymore. So we can see that theology of replacement taking place here as well. So there's a lot to take away from the wedding at Cana. The mother of Jesus appears only here and at the cross. She is an inclusio in the Gospel of John, a bookend framing device. Also, the water jars indicate cessation of a prior purpose. That's theology of replacement. Glory, that word is going to be used again and again and again to indicate the passion. And that ties to the mother of Jesus' appearance only at Cana and at the cross. This is also the first sign, John tells us. The second sign will happen after Jesus has been in Samaria and has come back north to Cana. His second sign will also happen at Cana, followed by 5 more signs. The pace picks up. The evangelist says, "After this, he and his mother, his brothers, and his disciples went down to Capernaum and stayed there only a few days. Since the Passover of the Jews was near, Jesus went up to Jerusalem." And notice that when it says went down and went up, we're talking about elevation. Once again, if you look at the maps on your screen, Capernaum is along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, whereas Cana was in the hill country. Jerusalem is also in the hill country, and it would require the visitor, the pilgrim going to Jerusalem, to literally rise in elevation. They would literally go up. As we cut to the chase of what happens next, as Jesus cleanses the temple in this famous scene that occurs in other Gospels as well, we notice that John does something different. Notice what he says. "Jesus answered and said to them, 'Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up.'" But he was speaking about the temple of his body. Epexegetic genitive, the temple that is his body. Therefore, when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they came to believe the scripture and the word Jesus had spoken. Way to kill the plot there, John. You're already telling us in John 2 that Jesus is going to rise from the dead. Doesn't that destroy the plot? Doesn't that kill all the suspense? It would if this were a mystery novel. Presumably the reader already knows that Jesus is going to die and rise from the dead. This story, therefore, tells us that John's purpose is something else. John wants to tell us how the disciples came to believe. They're having this experience now in the first Passover, but they're only going to make sense of it after the passion, death, and resurrection. And that parallels, presumably, not just what John's community is experiencing, but also what we as Christians believe. We know Christ, but we come to understand it more deeply as we journey in discipleship. And then the narrator gives us a curious conclusion to this episode. He says, "While he was in Jerusalem for the feast of Passover, many began to believe in his name when they saw the signs he was doing." Doesn't that sound lovely? Except it isn't. But Jesus would not trust himself to them because he knew them all and did not need anyone to testify about human nature. He himself understood it well. Indeed, more literally, we could translate, he did not need anyone to testify to him about man or about human beings. He himself understood him or understood it well concerning them. There's different ways to translate that. But this tells us that initial faith is not sufficient. Not everything that looks like belief, in fact, is. This tells us that not all is right. Not only has there been this initial controversy with the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem, not everyone who sees Jesus is going to come to faith quite so easily. And that opens the door for us to look at this distinction between the story and the discourse levels. In a narrative, and especially in the Gospel of John, on the one hand, we have the story level. That is how the different characters in the story relate to each other. When we're watching a movie or reading a novel or anything like that, we tend to think, how do the characters get along? The discourse level is something deeper, where we explore not how the characters get along, but rather, what is the author saying to his reader or to his viewer? How is the evangelist communicating with us, his readers, by means of his story? And notice what he's doing. He's drawing our attention to what true faith is. He's drawing our attention to the experience of coming to faith, retaining faith, and growing in faith, and the tension that we sometimes experience when we don't quite understand. There is much more to be said about all of this, and we will do so in our next several classes. Until then, read well and pray well.